Like, I know it's coming, so I don't care about seeing it personally. No, 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 no. You best believe I'm seeing that shit personally. Are you kidding me? Ain't no fucking way. I will see it with my own two dang eyes, baby. Yeah, no way. Yeah, so many graves to piss on. Out of your dang mind. You must bear witness. They share the same ideology, so there's a historical bond. No, they don't share the same ideology. I don't agree with that.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank
you very much. Joining me now.
I don't think that they share the same ideology. There's actually no ideological commitment whatsoever, and China never has required one either. There is no ideological bind, with the exception of like just being victims to Western intervention in the past historically. That's it. And also ongoing interventions in general.
What are your thoughts?
That is the only thing that has brought these other world powers together.
Of the democratic world tapping the hand, almost chumming up with the war criminal aggressor.
And while China is a transitional socialist state, and there are still many areas in desperate need of improvement in Chinese governance and issues, when it comes to their foreign policy, they have an incredibly, I would even say, a damaging way, a non-interventionist attitude. I mean, look no further than Israel. Okay? They will never intervene. They will never intervene. The only time where they engage in any kind of like foreign policy intervention is when they set up a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran over the ongoing conflict in Yemen. That was it, and that was pre-October 7. And the reason why they did that is because of their need for a steady flow of energy, and like obviously Iran was threatening oil refineries and vice versa. And of course, Saudi Arabia was threatening Iran and its position in Yemen. So obviously, like, China didn't want that to continue, so they packed it up. That's it. China only cares about China and nothing else. China only cares about doing trade around the globe and nothing else. Millions will thrive with Labubus. That has been their attitude.
Not as with an enemy, but as a partner. And I think that one of the issue which will be discussed, that will be the issue of revamping, refurbishing U.S.-Russian relations. And definitely Putin knows how to play on the false ideas, illusions of Donald Trump, who really wishes to implement some absolutely, in my view, illusionary economic projects or trying to revamp the rules of the world politics with Russia, or to drag Russia off China. Definitely, Putin will be playing all those cards. And as I said, it augurs quite well, quite bad for the possible outcome of this meeting for Ukraine.
There's lots of talk about territory. Donald Trump has talked about land swaps. Putin seems to want the rest of Donbass. I think it's about 18% or so that you still have. Putin wants
best
that.
Outcome here is
would Ukraine ever give that
ceasefire
up?
that is actually implemented.
Well, definitely there is a difficult reality on the front, but definitely we were quite adamant to not to allow further violation of our territorial integrity. What wants Putin is to add the Donbass to the land grabs he already made in Ukraine, occupying a new territory in addition to the territory and to Crimea occupied in 2014. the public opinion of Ukraine is definitely would like to end this war, but we cannot end the war at no matter at the basis of no matter what. Because it should be understood that if the world, the United States, Europe allows Putin to implement even the part of his plan for Ukraine, that would be the prelude to the new war, new aggression of Russia. And in this case, it would encompass not only Ukraine, but
okay, I can't.
Open the possibility
no
that he would address reporters from around the world on his own if he has to. He said he's going to meet with Putin here in Alaska. I think it's going to work out very well. And if it doesn't, I'm going to head back home real fast. The president has talked in the last 24 to 48 hours, and here we see the pictures right now.
I gotta pee.
Inside the summit room there in Anchorage, Alaska.
Oh, shit!
The sprawling joint base,
they're
Elmendorf Richardson.
speaking!
Let's listen to the reporters as they try their best here.
Everybody get out of the room! Thank you, press.
Back to the images from before. We're going to re-rack to the beginning of those images because, again, that's the pool feed of what's playing out in the room. You can hear all the reporters trying to get questions in. You can hear some of the advance team is telling folks to get out of the room, meaning the moment is over. Now they work on the summit on their own, the 6 in that room. If we're able to queue up those images again, we'll surely share them with you. But what we've witnessed here today, obviously, is the landing of Air Force One in Anchorage, Alaska, the Russian president arriving a short time thereafter. President Trump coming down those stairs, waiting at the red carpet for Vladimir Putin, a very warm embrace of the Russian leader. We have seen these two leaders at a summit before. You'll remember in Helsinki during the first administration. It was during that summit the president was asked during a joint press conference afterward, much like what they're talking about today, about Russian meddling in the 2016 election. The president, in so many words, said, the President Putin said it wasn't Russia. I have no reason not to believe him, essentially putting his faith in Vladimir Putin on that stage in front of the world over his own intelligence community back in Washington. That moment is something that really people on all sides of politics remember well. The question now, all these years later, is will President Trump get what he wants going into this summit? He's given Vladimir Putin, at least initially, what Putin would like, which is a summit on American soil. The White House had said leading up to this that this was in large part Vladimir Putin's idea. They came up with the location to do this in Alaska at Joint Base Elmendorf Richardson, obviously in Anchorage. They will meet together. And Mary Bruce, we know this is going to be 3-on-3. We did not know exactly who would be in that room. Now we know Steve Witkoff and Secretary of State Marco Rubio will be present as well.
And David, of course, they both bring their own unique strengths to this conversation.
It's over, you missed
Steve
it.
Witkoff, the president's
I didn't miss
special
shit,
envoy,
brother.
has
It's
been
going to be a fucking
developing this
6-hour
really,
meeting.
interesting
The
relationship with the
Donbass
Russians
dweller
and
writing
Vladimir
here
Putin
don't want to
over
sound like a
recent months
Zebop, but
was
saying
instrumental
with
in
Russia
setting
would be
up this
logistically
summit,
simple for the
that we are
people
seeing
here.
today that, of course, came together
But
very
staying with Russia would be
tastefully. And, of
logistically
course,
simple for the
Marco
people
Rubio,
here.
notably has been, quite harsh and critical of Russia and Vladimir
Bro,
Putin
how
in the
Hasan,
past,
not an
critical
obese
of
ham
Putin's
laird,
invasion.
streaming
That
6
tone
hours
has
a day?
somewhat softened
I work out a
in
lot.
the last several months, but it will be interesting
They
to
kicked the
get
press
their
out?
perspective.
Yeah, because they're lovers. They're about to have an orgy. You can't have so many cameras. Trump is camera shy.
Met when it was just them and their translators, a decision that got a lot of pushback and sparked a lot of concern about just getting to the truth of what was actually discussed in that meeting. Now you have a broader, bigger delegation. We were mentioning, of course, that Vladimir Putin has shown an interest in broadening out the conversation beyond just ending the war in Ukraine, possibly to discuss nuclear arms cooperation, economic cooperation as well, and trade. So possibly an effort by him to try and distract from what the president wants, which is that ceasefire. That, while he doesn't want to say it, is truly how we are defining, I think, the success of this meeting. Is he able to get progress and any kind of inklings towards that ceasefire? It certainly is what Ukrainian President Zelensky is hoping will come out of this meeting. But the president has also been very blunt that if that doesn't happen, happen, well, he'll just pack up and go home and go back to being, the president of the United States and focusing on everything else he has to focus on. Trump, though, is acutely aware of the power of the images here today. He is also aware of the criticism and the pushback that he has faced, that simply meeting with Putin here today, allowing the world to see these images, is giving Putin a win, but it is a gamble that President Trump is willing to take if it means that he can possibly make some progress towards ending this war, David.
But let me ask you, Mary, you mentioned Steve Witkoff, obviously his trip, and I've been talking about this here, his trip to Russia that led to this summit, the Russian Federation saying, members of the Russian delegation saying Witkoff gave some signals that the U.S. would be open to a summit like this. Now we've seen it somewhat hastily arranged. It came together. It's playing out now in Anchorage, Alaska. You'd have to think that both sides here have been in communication leading up to this moment. President Trump has even said in the last day or two that he looks forward to an additional summit during which President Zelensky would also be a part. He said that today they will talk about the future of Ukraine. We'll talk about the ceasefire. And Air Force One, he was asked about by Rachel Scott, our own Rachel Scott, about land swaps, which is something President Trump brought up. President Trump saying they will be discussed, but I've got to let Ukraine make that decision. And I think they'll make a proper decision. But for President Trump to say publicly in these last couple of days that he looks forward to this next step, a summit that would include Vladimir Putin and President Zelensky of Ukraine, would at least make you think that President Trump thinks going into this, there is room for some ground to be made here.
Yeah, it certainly seems that he is trying to lay the groundwork today for another meeting. He has said that that's really the one that matters. And remember, the president all along was pushing for a trilateral meeting. He wanted to sit down with both of them.
No, Trump is a come-hungry power bottom for sure. That's not even a question. That's not even a question. He's never topped. Trump has never topped a day in his life with Benjamin Netanyahu, with Vladimir Putin. He does not top. He is no loads refused, okay? Straight up.
Details, what an exchange of territory would look like, what that land swap would entail, that's going to be up to Ukraine. So the president telegraphing that he is here to try and take that initial step to really try and get these two leaders to the same table. Ukraine has said, though, for that to happen,
bottom shaming. I have tremendous respect for bottoms. You're out of your mind. I have been a bottoms rights advocate in perpetuity. This is not new for me, okay? I've told the bottoms to unionize for years.
And what he would do if that's the case. Mary, stick with us here. We have a cleaner feed, if you will, of the images of the two leaders meeting, preparing to begin this summit. We can show you inside the room moments ago. As you can see, President Trump right there next to Vladimir Putin for a photo op.
Is that the first time anyone has cruised in that beast or not? No, dude. Famously, Obama did it with the Cleveland. Obama got a Cleveland suck job. If you remember, from the toothless crackhead, according to the toothless crackhead. What was his name? Larry. Yeah, the Duluth Dyson. Larry sucked Obama off, and Obama did crack cocaine in the beast. The Duluth Dyson. Larry Sinclair, dude.
Putin, will you commit to a ceasefire? Will you stop killing of civilians? Make sure that there is a halt to any killing of civilians. Obviously, Vladimir Putin did not engage. The moment we can play you that audio, they'll let me know in my ear, and we'll play it for you. But Jonathan Karl, our chief Washington correspondent, watching these images play out. John, you saw the warm reception on the red carpet, as you point out. President Trump and his team at the White House have made it very clear that they believe up until now nothing else has worked. And so, as you alluded to earlier, this is sort of the home field advantage. That's the way President Trump sees this. The red carpet, American soil, riding in the beast, and the presidential motorcade. Vladimir Putin appeared very happy with that as well, smiling through those windows. The hard part, though, John, is what comes next.
Absolutely. And look, Donald Trump has never been reluctant to embrace even pariah dictators around the world. The embrace of Kim Jong-un, the embrace of Vladimir Putin,
this kind of language I think is like somewhat unwarranted. And I feel a little bit more confident criticizing it now, especially after talking to Matt Duss yesterday, because like you gotta deal with these dudes. Okay. I'm always gonna be on board with dealing with these dudes, especially adversaries, rather than taking a position, taking like a Brandonian stance where you're like, no talks whatsoever is never gonna happen. It's how you talk to these guys and what you get out of those conversations that obviously matter. And the problem that I have with Donald Trump, at least with respect to this dealing, is that the conversations that he's having with Vladimir Putin, I don't think are going to be productive. We'll see. Only time will tell. I just don't think that it's going to be. I don't think it's going to lead to a serious ceasefire. Centrist take from Hasan, Mr. Moderate Piker. I'll give you an example of a pariah leader that Donald Trump actually, I think, handled even better than Democratic administrations have. Kim Jong-un. Donald Trump, ironically enough, due to the South Korean leadership at the time, and due to Donald Trump's like weird fascination, had more productive conversations between South Korea and North Korea than any other leadership prior or since. Like that literally was not, that was actually incredibly solid in terms of like American foreign policy. People got mad at me at the time, but I gave him credit for it. That was on Trump 1, where Donald Trump basically stayed out of the South Korea, North Korea talks, and even de-escalated in terms of like military training and the posturing that they were engaging in around the Korean Peninsula. That was productive. Obviously, it amounted to nothing at the end of the day, but that was a good thing that he did. And he didn't take up the liberal attitude. He didn't take on the liberal attitude of like just vilifying the enemy. I thought those meetings were a good idea too, but they ultimately resulted in nothing. They got a photo op, and neither the U.S. or DPRK really changed their behavior much. No, there was a period of productive talks back and forth, but I think South Korean leadership has obviously fallen apart since then. The guy who was managing those talks is gone, right? And then South Korea ended up electing the incel president who ran on an even more aggressive stance against North Korea in the process. Who knows where it goes now? But you know, I'm all in favor. I'm all in favor of America allowing. He did actually do a temporary halt to ICBM launchers and nuclear tests as a result of those talks. Yeah, there was positive. There were positive things that came out of that meeting, like North Korean de-escalation and a period of. So legitimizing Kim for nothing was a better job than Dems, really? Yes, it was. It was a really solid attempt at having diplomatic talks between South Korea and North Korea. That was true. That is true. It's if I give credit to Barack Obama for the JCPOA, which I do, right? And if I give credit to Barack Obama for normalizing, or at least starting the path of normalizing relations with Cuba, which I do, right? You have to give Donald Trump credit for the way he dealt with the North Korea, South Korea situation. Instead of like direct intervention, and instead of like leaning heavily into constant escalations, constant militarization, he did the exact opposite, and he allowed South Korea and North Korea to have this conversation on their own. Obviously, there was still, profound American influence in South Korean politics. That's never going to go away. But like, there is no like legitimizing a fucking foreign leader. Like that is silly lib talk. The dude is in charge of a country with nuclear arms. Like there is no, it's like saying, oh, you're platforming Donald Trump. It just doesn't mean anything. These are meaningless terms that you're using.
Into these negotiations, and he has said, I want the rest of Donetsk. I want to be able to say, this part is mine that I don't own. This part of Zaporizhia, I want. I want this down at Kherson. But the real goal is to get the rest of the Donbass here. Why? Because it's a rich agricultural area. It's where the majority of industrial production comes from. And underneath the ground, there is critical minerals like titanium and lithium and coal. And so this is the consolation prize. There's no way that Ukraine can accede to this kind of releasing this much territory to Putin. So as the president has said, he's not going to negotiate today on who gets what. But this is what the expectation is that Putin is going to ask for. It will be a very difficult negotiation because neither Putin can show much leeway and Zelensky cannot afford to give up this much of Ukrainian territory.
Yeah. Lithuanium, which comes from Lithuania.
The eastern part of Ukraine. Steve, leave those circles right up there. Actually, if you want
It's
to
Lithuania mentioned.
You know, in the east right there. Steve, anywhere where there are stripes along that eastern region of Ukraine, that's where Russia has made significant advances since this invasion. And Steve, all those circles that you've just put back on the map, as Steve points out, that's what they want in addition to the area where they have made strategic advances. Reuters and other agencies estimate up to 20% of Ukraine is now in Russia's hands. And Steve, this is going to be the central question of these discussions. Even if they get the ceasefire today, then you're going to get.
Will you grant critical support to J.D. Pondon and his goal of ruining the American empire? No, because once again. While I joke about this sort of stuff, empires don't fall quietly, unfortunately. So the more Donald Trump deprives America, the worse things will get for not only Americans at the domestic level, but also everyone around the world. Look no further than America's grip of power waning on the global stage and what it is allowing, what it's entertaining with Israel. Okay? Empires don't die quietly. They go away kicking and screaming, and it's incredibly bloody. And especially given the short time, the timeline of human existence, and you know, our lifespan being relatively short, we will experience all of that. We will see it. And one might think that we might not have any say in the process anyway. So, you know, we're just kind of along for the ride at this point.
On both sides of this war. Steve Gagnon, our thanks to you. Let's go back to these pictures from just moments ago as we wrap up this part of our live coverage today. Again, President Trump in Anchorage, Alaska, arriving before Vladimir Putin, then greeting the Russian leader when he arrived on the red carpet there, saluting obviously the troops, but also giving a very warm welcome to Vladimir Putin after they had that photo op there on the stage of Alaska 2025 there. We then watched.
I'm going to kill myself before that. You shouldn't. You want to know why? And I say this all the time. Here's why. Are you really going to not see the end of Israel? Like you're really gonna end your life before you see the end to Zionism as a fascist ideology? You can't do that. You gotta survive directly out of spite. Okay? Never kill yourself. You're really gonna fucking cut it short before even Donald Trump dies? You know what I mean? There's plenty of this is a target-rich environment, chock full of evil villains everywhere. You're really gonna let them outlive you? Fuck no. No shot. No shot.
And then we'll be coming on the air live coverage here on ABC of the joint press conference with President Trump.
Oh yeah, there's a joint press conference coming up, baby. Like I know it's coming, so I don't care about seeing it personally. No. You best believe I'm seeing that shit personally. Are you kidding me? Ain't no fucking way. I will see it with my own two dang eyes, baby. Yeah, no way. Yeah, so many graves to piss on. Out of your dang mind. You must bear witness. In terms of land swaps, I think Russia should be able to retain parts of Eastern Donbass and Crimea, but with certain economic rights for Ukraine. Reparations for Ukrainians as well should be paid, but I doubt Putin would agree to that. I mean, I think Putin has a maximalist position that he has made very clear over and over again. So I don't know how they're going to fucking square that circle. But let's take a look at two knowledgeable parties, one of which I actually routinely bring up, Matt Mersheimer and also Matt Duss, who I had on the broadcast yesterday, and we actually had a conversation around Russia and Ukraine. They had a debate on Democracy Now! This morning.
President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin are meeting today in Alaska for Ukrainian
President Putin, President Zelensky, and if they can, it'll be great.
All right, this is the intro.
To talk more about the war in Ukraine, U.S.-Russian relations, and more, we're joined by two guests. In Washington, D.C., Matt Duss is with us, Executive Vice President at the Center for International Policy, former foreign policy advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders. And John Mearsheimer joins us from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Mearsheimer is professor of political science at the University of Chicago and author most recently of How States Think, the Rationality of Foreign Policy. In 2014, he wrote a widely read piece for Foreign Affairs headlined, Why the Ukraine Crisis is the West's Fault. Well, Professor Mearsheimer, let's begin with you. Talk about what's happening today in Alaska and what your view is of Trump's relationship with Putin and Zelensky and what needs to happen now.
Very much wants a peace agreement. He wants to shut down the Ukraine war. But the fact is that he's not able to do that. And meeting in Alaska with Putin today is not going to do anything to help achieve that end. And the principal problem here...
Dude, Mearsheimer thinks U.S. is good and not an empire. He's stupid as fuck. I love when people go... I love when people hate Mearsheimer because he's like still very much... an American who has like very American style foreign policy opinions, like, being a China hawk, things of that nature. And then the other side of it is the war hawking liberal international relations understanders who also hate Mearsheimer and say he's a fucking Russian stooge. Yes, Mearsheimer is not a leftist, okay? He's not. But his analysis, especially as it pertains to Ukraine and Russia before the Russian invasion into Ukraine, has been fairly prescient. It's important to fucking look at a variety of different opinions, even if you don't fully agree with them. Everyone needs to fucking calm down.
Amy, is that the Russians have a series of demands that they will not compromise on, that Trump cannot accept, and certainly the Ukrainians won't accept, and the Europeans won't accept. And those three demands involve the West and Ukraine recognizing that Russia has annexed 4 Ukrainian oblasts and the Crimea. That's number one. Number two is the Russians insist that Ukraine be a neutral state. This basically means it can't be in NATO and it can't have security guarantees from the West, especially the United States. And then the third demand is that Ukraine disarm to the point where it doesn't have significant offensive capability against Russia. These are the maximalist
positions that Vladimir Putin wants to get out of these conversations. They are also directly at odds with objective reality, as far as like the sovereignty of a nation, for example. They're also, it's not maximalist. It absolutely is maximalist. The reason why it's also ridiculous, like no NATO assurances is fine. It's a guarantee anyway. It was a guarantee even before Russia invaded Ukraine, which is part of the reason why I say that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was not only immoral and totally unjustifiable, but also it was stupid. It was a mistake, in my opinion. Okay, because Russia had already taken over and annexed Ukrainian territory, internationally recognized Ukrainian territory, such as Crimea. And also on top of that, the 2 oblasts that we're talking about, DPR, LPR, already had enough like Russian intervention that they could have continued meddling in Ukrainian affairs and would never have allowed Ukraine to gain permanent sovereignty or find itself directly in find itself directly in the Western sphere of influence for that reason. So Putin could have just continued to do trade and trade max and you know, meddle in Ukrainian affairs that way and keep Ukraine not directly in the sphere of Western influence without actually killing so many fucking people. If there's no permanent ceasefire, Putin will use it as a time to reset and go back in. Ukraine has actually been extremely successful in defending off Russian forces in many regions since 2014. Russia would also... Wait, what? You can't say that, bro. What the fuck do you mean? Russia literally took over 20% of Ukrainian soil since 2022. That is a crazy statement to make.
Demands are unalterable from a Russian perspective, but obviously they're unacceptable to the Ukrainians. They're unacceptable to the Europeans, and there's no way that Trump can agree to them. So there'll be a lot of talking today about a lot of issues. But
Russian media is reporting that there was a car waiting for Putin on the tarmac. It's unclear why the Russian leader got inside the beast with Trump. I don't think it's unclear. I think it's very clear why he did that. He wanted alone time with his buddy.
I find it hard to imagine you're going to make any progress towards an agreement.
And Professor Mearsheimer, the mere fact that this summit is between Trump and Putin.
I called that out too when I saw it, because like they're not supposed to be alone. The entire meeting is supposed to be with like Trump and Steve Witkoff and Marco Rubio and then Putin and his envoys. So like the fact that they got alone time is actually significant.
Doesn't that, in effect, reinforce the perspective of some that this has essentially been a proxy war between the United States and Russia from the beginning?
Oh, it's clearly been a proxy war, and there's no question that the United States and Russia are almost at war with each other. And therefore, it makes sense for Putin and for Trump to sit down and talk and try to work out the broad parameters of a deal. But the problem is there are two other players in the game, and those two other players are Ukraine and Europe. So you have a situation here, Juan, where even if Putin and Trump were to work out some sort of agreement, they could lay out the parameters of a deal, they have to run that deal by the Ukrainians and the Europeans. And I think if Trump makes the necessary concessions to accommodate the Russians, the problem is that there's no way the Ukrainians, the Europeans, and truth be told, a large chunk of the American national security establishment would accept the deal that Putin worked out. And that's why this one is ultimately going to be settled on the battlefield.
I'd like to bring in Matt Duss to the conversation. Matt, your perspective on this summit in Alaska and what you expect or think may come out of it.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, in terms of what's going to come out of this summit, I actually don't disagree with Professor Mearsheimer. It seems like there's not been a great deal of preparation going into this summit. And Putin, as the professor said, Putin's goals do not seem to have changed much, if at all. He wants a Ukraine that's effectively under his influence, part of Russia's sphere of control. That's not something the Ukrainians are going to agree with. I think we can imagine a possible resolution to this in which Russia retains control of parts of Ukraine. I think there is some evidence that Ukrainians themselves would settle for that if it really ended the war. And I think that's the key question here. Can we get an agreement that ends the war, not just temporarily, but in the long term? And I think that's very, very unlikely, at least right now. Although I will say, just the fact that the U.S. and Russia are sitting down could possibly create some other opportunities that we haven't yet considered, although I'm very skeptical.
I want to put this question to both Matt Duss and Professor Mearsheimer, because I know that you disagree on this issue, is how did we get to this point? Let's start with you, Matt.
Well, we got to this point because Vladimir Putin decided to invade Ukraine and try to take it over. There's a longer history there, of course. I mean, Professor Mearsheimer has talked a lot about the growth of NATO and how Russia sees that as a threat. I think there is evidence that that is true. I mean, that others have claimed that as well. U.S. officials throughout the 1990s, former Secretary of Defense Bill Perry, former head of the CIA Bill Burns, have all in their time as diplomats mentioned that this is a real problem for Russia, not just for Putin. However, that does not explain the entire problem. NATO alone was not the cause of this war. Putin himself has made clear various times, most notably in a speech that he gave in June 2021, of his much grander vision of a kind of restored Russian imperium in which Ukraine was a part. So I think the growth of NATO again, is part of Russia's larger grievance, but I do think Putin has made clear that he has a pretty grandiose historical conception of what he sees as a kind of renewed Russian empire that is simply not consistent, certainly with Ukraine's own sovereignty and independence. And I don't think it's consistent with a kind of a general approach to international affairs that is based in any kind of law or norms.
Professor Mearsheimer.
I think, Amy, before I give you my explanation on what caused the war, it's very important to understand that how you think.
Wasn't it about denazifying Ukraine? No one believed this. I hope. It's just like Israel's goal is not to denazify or de-Hamasify Gaza. Okay? That's not like countries and governments, foreign and domestic, behave in certain ways for their own personal interests, okay? Their material interests. But what they say in the process is all marketing. That's it. That's it. It's fucking ridiculous. Do all countries recognize Ukraine as a state? Yes. What? MAGA communists believe it? No, they're just fucking trying to say that to themselves, okay? They're just repeating it to themselves so that they can act like there is a defensible prospect here. And it's really interesting because like so many fucking liberals have gotten mad at me for even bringing up Azov or Ukrainian nationalist movements and their historic allegiance to the Nazi Holocaust and the Nazi initiatives. And also its contemporary versions that are still very much primarily neo-Nazi. And they always get mad when I bring it up to be like, oh, you're giving justifications to Russia. You're actually giving legitimacy to Russia. This is Russian propaganda. It's not. Russia has its own fucking version of neo-Nazis as well. You know? It's not even just the Wagner group either. Like there are a fuck ton of fascists in Russia. Okay? People just make shit up. People say, oh, we're doing this for this reason or that reason. But there's an underlying material reason for all actions that governments engage with. At most, the only argument I will entertain beyond like land grabs, resource extraction, would be security concerns. That's it. And security concerns is also usually a lie, for the record. It's a lie that people tell. But like there's an understandable security concern that like every country has. That's where Mearsheimer's analysis kicks in terms of realpolitik, where he says like there is a reasonable security concern for a foreign power in its own periphery, in its own backyard, to ensure that they don't have further NATO encroachment, especially when this like security cooperation has been designed specifically to undermine Russia and to militarily dominate Russia. Starting off with the USSR, but then continuing against Russia as a foreign adversary, even after the dissolution of the USSR.
About the causes of the war has huge implications for how you think about the prospects for actually settling the conflict. Now, Matt basically makes the argument that the principal cause of the war was that Putin had grand ambitions. He wanted to restore the Soviet Union, create a greater Russia or what have you. And he was interested in conquering Ukraine and incorporating it into Russia. I don't believe that. I believe there's hardly any evidence to support that line of argument. And I think it's quite clear. In fact, I think there's...
See, this is the part I don't actually agree with him on. Like, I think if Russia had enough... If Russia had the power to do so, they absolutely would bring the entirety of the Ukrainian nation state directly back under the banner of Russia. Especially because, like, while it's also marketing to say, oh, Russians and Ukrainians are brothers, and Ukraine means the border, and it's always historically been a part of Russia, like, all those narratives are still marketing. There is definitely that I would say is closer to the reason for why Putin is doing this than denazification. The ties to power situation and wanting to reestablish status as a regional hegemon, but it also seems as though Putin and those around him have an ideology at hand here. Putin has made it very clear that he does not believe in Ukrainian identity, talks at length about his obsession with imperial Russian history. This is a war for regional hegemony and for Russian identity. It's not either or. Yeah. Like, the idea that like Russia does not have greater ambition of overtaking Ukraine is I think false. Does it mean that they will fully entertain it? I don't know. He didn't mince words. He said there's no evidence. They have grand ambitions, so should be easily to disprove if there is evidence, right? Yes. The easiest way to disprove it is to listen to fucking Vladimir Putin's own statements when he was talking to Tucker Carlson. What do you mean? If we take at face value the Greater Israel Project coming from Zionists that range all the way from Benjamin Netanyahu to even like the quote-unquote centrist opposition, why the fuck wouldn't we take Vladimir Putin's words at face value as well? I'm not saying Mearsheimer is lying. I'm saying that his analysis on this aspect, I think, is incorrect. The evidence is not only trying to, the Russian attempt to overtake much larger parts of Ukraine, including like Western Ukrainian territory, including like literally invading Kyiv, okay? And the other evidence that I have for it is Vladimir Putin's own words. The idea that, Ukraine has always been, Ukraine is not like a sovereign nation state, that Ukraine has always historically been a part of Russia, and it should be a part of Russia. That's what he says all the time. I don't think that's like unfair to hear him out on. I think that's a fairly decent amount of evidence. Sounds like you're overly reading between the lines on Mearsheimer here. He might agree with you with what you just said, but his point is they didn't have the power to consequentially freely do this act, and they felt pressure because of NATO expansion. They acted while subject to substantial consequences because of that.
Overwhelming evidence that it was NATO expansion into Ukraine that drove this train. Putin made it clear when NATO first announced in April 2008 that Ukraine would become part of NATO. Putin made it perfectly clear that he viewed this as an existential threat, and this would not be allowed to happen. And the invasion on February 24th, 2022, was driven in large part by fear of NATO expansion. And what that means is that
Mearsheimer's views the same as you and Chapo initially held. No, I remember us rightfully blaming NATO encroachment in 2022. No, what made you get all libbed up all of a sudden? Because Russia invaded. I don't think I'm saying that the only reasonable security concern that I totally agree with Mearsheimer's assessment on is NATO encroachment. But if I knew that that was never going to be a thing, a real thing, and Russia certainly knew that that was never going to be a real thing, then a military invasion of fucking Ukraine was absolutely an insane fucking thing to do. Was the wrong thing to do. It was not only immoral and violent, but it was also costly, and I think will hurt the Russian country in the long run. And it has already. They have incurred penalties. Yes, of course, NATO encroachment plays a role in this. That's I literally said that already. I said that just now. That has not changed.
Putin sees NATO expansion. He sees Ukraine and NATO as an existential threat. And because he sees it as an existential threat, he's unwilling to compromise. Many people think that in Alaska, what Trump can do is work out a deal where there's a territorial swap, where there's a ceasefire to start with, and so forth and so on, and the Russians will make this accommodation and that accommodation. That's not true. The Russians have laid out their demands from the very beginning. They have not wavered at all. And the reason they have not wavered is because they view Ukraine in NATO as an existential threat. We, on the other hand, in the West, don't see things that way. We think that that Putin was just aggressive. He didn't get all he wanted, but we can work out a deal with him. I don't think that is an accurate description of reality. I think, again, you want to understand that Ukraine has to be a neutral state. There can be no Ukraine in NATO. There can be no Western security guarantees to Ukraine. But we refuse to accept that. The Ukrainians refuse to accept that. And that's why we're at an impasse today.
Matt Duss, I wanted to ask you, back in the 2013 and 2014 on Democracy Now!, we had the Russia expert Stephen Cohen on many times, and he...
Your view is valid for the first world, but many third world countries for many third world countries, Russia is seen as the underdog fighting the hegemon and is supported more than ever today. I have described this as well. I think it's an incorrect assessment. But yes, I have talked about this already. The pro-Palestine, pro-Russia position is very much alive in many, many parts of the world. Parts of the world that we never actually take a look at or care about. But it is definitely a real thing. Russia sells this as a war against Western hegemony. And a lot of people see it like that. And I keep trying to explain this. To people. And they think I'm saying that they think I'm agreeing with that assessment. But yes, this is a very common position outside of the Western world. They clipped me explaining this while simultaneously saying I don't agree with it, and made it seem as though that was my position recently.
He essentially said the same thing. In fact, he insisted that the president who was overthrown, Yanukovych, wanted to maintain the neutrality in the Maidan revolt in 2014, wanted to maintain the neutrality of Ukraine, but it was NATO that was insisting that Ukraine could not be neutral, and that had to take a stand against Russia, and that's part of what then led to his overthrow that the United States clearly backed. Wondering your sense of that, and also, do you think that if Mexico reached a security agreement with China or Russia, stationed troops from those countries in its own country, or missiles from those countries in Mexico, that the United States would sit idly by?
Sure. I mean, all good questions. I mean, first, I want to just respond to something Professor Mearsheimer said. I mean, it's baffling to hear him claim that there's no evidence that Putin wanted to conquer Ukraine and establish a new kind of Russian imperium. Putin has said this explicitly. I would encourage people to look at that June 2021 speech that I mentioned. He also, landed troops outside Kyiv in February 2022 as part of the failed effort to topple Ukraine's government and install his, a friendly Russian government. Those Russian troops were not landed in Kyiv to go camping.
Here we go. Let's make up some bullshit. Yeah, he said it. Sure. Dust information. No, I don't think it's unfair to say. It's not just the 2021 speech, dude. Like, he has literally repeated that over and over again. I think it's interesting how you will contextualize historically pre-October 7th, but not pre-Russian invasion. What about the treatment of ethnic Russians in eastern Ukraine? Maidan. Russia sits firmly in the anti-imperialist camp, and Ukraine is a running dog of imperialism. This is your lib take. The reason why, first of all, I do factor all of that in. That's number one. Number two, you just don't agree with my analysis after I factor all of that in. So that's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous claim that you're making. Okay? You want to know why? You want to know why my assessment ultimately is is not suited to your, is not aligned with your belief. The reason why it's not is because in order to save the Donbass, you must level the Donbass is a fucking stupid argument. 14,000 people died in the back and forth between the Ukrainian National Guard, the artillery strikes in LPR and DPR, many civilians, right? Airstrikes, artillery strikes. Ukraine is like shelling its own territory because there are Russian speakers and ethnic Russians that live there that want autonomy, let's say, right? That's the argument here. How the fuck do you justify rolling tanks and mining the entire area as the only acceptable solution here? That's fucking insane. That's insane. Every single world power, both within the periphery and outside of American sphere of influence, makes this exact same argument. Okay? That is the argument that they make. You don't have to believe it. You know what I mean? Every single invasion is justifiable with that framework. Putin would like to be dictator of Earth, but that isn't a rational argument for why he would invade any individual country at a specific time. Mearsheimer's position on why the invasion took place when it did is far more coherent, to be honest, even if it requires him being somewhat irrational from your POV on NATO aggression. You believe Russia started this invasion with the idea of occupying Ukraine, a 40 million nation, large country with the backing of Western weapons. Your evidence is speech. Putin can dream of it, but he can't take over the Ukraine, and is not why he did it. Guys, the very fact that he wanted to forcibly overthrow the Ukrainian leadership and implement whatever leadership he thought would be more favorable by literally going into Kyiv is evidence enough that that was a part of his grand design. That was a part of his ambitions. I don't think it's a fucking ridiculous assessment to make. He literally tried it. It failed. Okay? So now he's going through the motions of territorial acquisition that is much more manageable. In the long run, I don't even think that's going to be manageable anyway. I don't even think that's going to be manageable for the next decade, the next decade plus. Like Russia completely cooked any chances of Georgia entering NATO, any chances of Ukraine entering NATO, which is, I think, a reasonable position to hold regardless, when it took pieces of Ukraine, when it took Crimea and annexed Crimea, when it took pieces of Georgia. Any further incursion beyond that is just is ridiculous. Why are you pretending to be a NATO supporter? I'm not.
So that effort failed, but I think that's clear evidence that Putin's ambitions were much larger.
Why did they let the Baltic countries join NATO then? Because they don't have enough they don't have enough manpower. Russia, for all intents and purposes, will throw manpower in the fucking meat grinder to win a war of attrition, but they also understand their limitations, especially because they don't have America backing them like Israel. So Israel can do a 7-front war because they're fucking psycho, especially because all of the countries that that Israel is dominating have already been dominated by America before Israel gets to blow them up because they have no fucking anti-air defense systems, for example. But the reason why Finland and Sweden, which previously had a dual neutrality agreement, with Russia and didn't join NATO was partially because Russia's invasion of Ukraine gave them, one, made them fearful. Two, if you want to look at it cynically, gave them the reason for why they could advocate to join NATO. And also, Russia's failure to overtake Ukraine in a short period of time, like they said he was going to be able to, made it so that Finland could join without fear of Russian invasion. That's it.
Then the professor seems to claim.
Like the point is I guess it's like almost the way I look at the situation is almost like if you can understand why the global South would see Russia as like the militant vengeance against the hegemonic superpower that's dominated them, you should also be able to understand why countries that are in the immediate vicinity of Russia would be fearful of Russian incursion. Especially after Russia literally did invade Ukraine. And not only did it invade Ukraine, they didn't just like roll the tanks and just take over Ukraine with ease, but instead Ukraine was able to, with the entire backing of the West, capable of pushing back Russia. This showed all of the neighboring countries that, one, there was good reason for them to join this American security cooperation, and two, they would most likely not be able to, they would most likely not have to withstand any sort of like Russian military conquest because Russia had its hands full with Ukraine.
Now, with regard to the Maidan and Yanukovych, I don't think I would put this on NATO. Clearly, as I said, Russia and Putin have seen the growth of NATO as a threat. I think we should take that seriously. That's something we need to discuss. I would also note that countries are not absorbed into NATO. Countries...
entire backing of the West, seriously? Yes. Are we going to act like the Western nations were not on board with allowing, with giving Ukraine the capabilities to defend itself? What are you talking about? Okay, that I disagree with. What the fuck? Are you? Is this like a weird semantics argument that factors Hungary as like the lion of the West or something? Is that your argument? Hungary, the real lion of the West, was actually not a part of this coalition, and therefore it wasn't the entirety of Western nations. This is one of those shadows of the POV of like anything less than nukes or foreign boots on the ground armies isn't actually support as wild. Yeah, I just nobody said they emptied every armory, chatter. Yeah.
In Europe have sought to join NATO. This is not something that is being imposed on them. They see joining NATO as part of their security. Again, that's not to diminish, I think, the kind of the way that Russia sees this as provocative. I do think we need to take that seriously. But the Maidan Revolution was not about NATO. The Maidan Revolution was about the people of Ukraine seeking closer relationships with Europe rather than closer relationships with Russia. And I think it's important to note
converging interests, classic tool of American State Department. You got people who have anger and resentment towards their administration. America comes in. It's already established civil society organizations and numerous other means of pushing buttons. They take advantage of one of the poorest countries in Eastern Europe at the time. Okay. They take advantage of the volatility and move the organic protests that develop in a direction that suits their interests.
that. This is not something that was driven by NATO. This was something that was driven by the Ukrainian people. And I think this constant obsession with NATO really denies Ukrainians their own agency. And I think we need to put that really at the center of this conversation. Now, your question about Mexico.
Like the example of America's success, if you look at color revolutions, or if you look at the Arab Spring, right? Those are examples of American success. A genuine instability creates resentment. People rise up, and then America takes advantage of that destabilization to either further destabilize the country or to literally push their own to push their own people into gaining more power and influence. Okay. But a failed version of that was with Hong Kong. Understandable desire for people living in Hong Kong not to be under the influence of China, even though it was obviously on a lease, basically like a loaner agreement to England, to the UK, and it was slated to end regardless, and they just like accelerated that process, but it was ultimately a failure. Now China completely controls Hong Kong. I'm saying it was a failure from the West's position. Or maybe the U.S. is behind the uprisings. No, this is also silly. Okay, that's a silly, like, the CIA does not have a hypnosis tool. Okay, no, they can only take advantage of the actual fears that people have, the actual anger and resentment that people have. They can't just like whip up a protest out of nowhere. Okay, this is something that a lot of people fail to contend with. Like, a lot of leftists look at this. This is not a centrist position. This is just a correct position. Okay, they can't just like radio free Europe or radio free China their way into mass instability. Look at Iran. Look at the decades of American propaganda. They can fund certain initiatives and take advantage of them. There's a great book by Vincent Bevins about all the 2010s protests called If We Burn. Yes, it highlights the failures of horizontalism in these movements. Like, think about it this way. If the CIA had that much motion, there wouldn't be this much anti-Israel sentiment right now in American society, in the Western world. Come on. If the CIA had the capability of just like kickstarting protests out of nowhere, and it was just not even like, they weren't even like using the genuine instability and anger that the people had to their benefit, to suit their purpose, to overtake movements, okay, then they would be able to just use that hypnosis beam on American society broadly and fucking make them all